Hello, how are you? Today I'm going to talk about what happens in your body when you eat fruit at night. Some people eat fruit as dessert, as a late night snack, or even replace dinner with a plate of fruit. And they want to know what will happen to their blood sugar, their weight, their digestion, and even their sleep. I'm going to explain all of that to you right now. You're going to love this video, so stay until the end. You won't want to miss it. Before we start, I want to ask you if you have the habit of eating fruit at night. How much do you eat? Which fruit do you eat the most? I would love to see your comment. Go ahead and like the video. This is super important to me. It shows YouTube that you support the channel and that you trust my content. And if you know someone who has this same question, go ahead and share this video. Let's help more people. A lot of people are afraid of this time at night. They get worried about eating fruit at this time because they think this time might be more dangerous for us. My metabolism will slow down a lot at night. But we know that the body doesn't just shut down at night, right? The body keeps working normally while we sleep, digesting food, regulating hormones, producing energy, all of that. The thing is, many people, especially at night, may end up, because of the circadian rhythm, being more sensitive to the amount of carbohydrates they consume at that time and to the overall glycemic load of the meal they've eaten, which can impact their blood sugar more noticeably. So really, depending on the type of fruit, the amount of fruit, and the meal as a whole, it can indeed have an impact on your body's health, on blood sugar, on weight control, and so on. Let's start talking about that right now. First of all, not all fruits are the same, right? In fact, fruits are quite different from each other. For example, if we look at the nutritional information of an avocado, a strawberry, and a banana, they're completely different. The first thing is that everything will depend on the type of fruit you eat. There are fruits that have very few calories and very few carbs, like berries in general. I mentioned strawberries, but it could be blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, and several other fruits like that. There are fruits that are low in calories and have a high water content. Even though they have a lot of glucose, they have so much water and so much fiber that this ends up being diluted, as is the case with watermelon, melon, and even papaya itself. These are fruits that are more diluted because of their naturally high water content. There are also the more basic fruits in terms of glycemic response, like apple, pear, and even guava. These are fruits that usually have low impact, especially when we eat them with the skin. And there are fruits that are fattier, that have a very small amount of net carbohydrates, such as avocado and coconut, for example. These have a high amount of fat, a high amount of fiber, but this fiber is not absorbed. So their net carbohydrate content is very low, and they have very little impact on our blood sugar. A lot of people say to me, Patricia, I don't want to eat fruit at night because I know that fructose is really bad for the liver, and that's the worst time for us to consume fructose. It's true, fructose is really bad for the liver, but it's not necessarily the fructose that's present in fruit. Because the fructose that's present in fruit comes along with fiber and other nutrients. I just gave you several examples here. Normally, what we don't recommend consuming at night is the fructose from ultra-processed foods. And we can notice that foods which are very sweet often have fructose syrup. You can see this on the label, because those contain it in large amounts. And in fact, it's usually glucose that will have a high glycemic impact on you. So fruit by itself, if consumed in moderation, won't have such a toxic amount of fructose for your liver as most people imagine because of videos out there on the internet. This is a very important point for us to talk about as well. There's also the matter of the amount of fiber naturally present in fruit, which can have a beneficial impact on the gut, especially if you consume these fruits which are higher in fiber at night. Fruits with skin and fruits that naturally contain more fiber can help with intestinal transit because we know that usually people who consume a greater amount of fiber before going to bed may experience a gastrocolic reflex in the morning that leads to a bowel movement right at the start of the day. So if you're someone who wants to stimulate more bowel emptying right at the beginning of the morning, maybe eating a fruit with more fiber like papaya, for example, before going to bed could be an interesting option for you. When I talk about this idea of eating before bed, there are two ideal options for you to consider. Either you eat a moderate portion of dessert after dinner, or if you're someone who has dinner very early, some people have dinner at 5 or 6 in the evening and then feel a bit hungry before bed. The ideal is that at least about 2 hours before you go to sleep, you have a light snack. This could be a portion of fruit, some yogurt, or chia seeds to lower the glycemic index. And it gives you a feeling of fullness so you don't end up snacking. In fact, this is a very common mistake that people end up making. They say, I'm going to replace my dinner with fruit because I want to live a healthier life. I want to lose weight. This might seem healthy, but it can actually result in a very high carbohydrate load, cause an insulin spike, and lead to a rebound effect where your blood sugar drops, making you even more hungry. So, the ideal thing is to make those combinations I mentioned to you. Ideally, you shouldn't replace dinner with a plate of fruit because then you're missing the protein. Fruit is super healthy, and depending on the fruit, as I mentioned, it can have carbohydrates, fiber, and even healthy fats. But fruits usually don't have a very significant amount of protein, as a rule. So, relying solely on a plate of fruit to replace your dinner is not the best choice. Speaking of this time at night, we can also consider the role that fruit can play in improving sleep quality, because there are some fruits that can be beneficial in a complementary way. We know that kiwi contains compounds that help with serotonin production. Banana has tryptophan, magnesium, and potassium, which can also help in the production of this neurotransmitter. Cherries already have a small amount of melatonin, so they can help in that regard. On the other hand, there are fruits that, when people eat them at night, can cause more gastric sensitivity. They can worsen sleep because they may be more acidic, like pineapple, passion fruit, or a more acidic orange, or if you consume a large amount of lemon. So, be careful with the type of fruit you consume. And remember, if you want to improve your sleep, I have a playlist here with the best foods, the worst foods, how to practice proper sleep hygiene, what to change in your bedroom, and more. I'll leave it down below in the description for you. Another question many people ask me about eating fruit at night has to do with diabetes and nighttime glucose tolerance. Even people who aren't diabetic can have a lower tolerance to glucose at night, and there's also the issue of lower energy expenditure during the evening, which can have a greater impact on our blood sugar levels. For those who are diabetic then, any excessive amount of carbohydrates at night can make this worse. And then, once again, there's the issue of the glycemic load of the meal. Of course, the type of fruit you eat will have an impact, because if you eat a large amount of banana, for example, or mango, it will have a completely different effect than if you eat a strawberry, for instance. But as I always tell you, if you portion the amount of fruit correctly and then you add a protein and add a fiber, you slow down the absorption of that fruit and can ensure that we have a lower glucose spike, a lower insulin spike if that's the case. So, the ideal is to think about the meal as a whole and avoid eating plain, simple fruit in large quantities during the nighttime period. So, important points for you. Pay attention to avoiding large quantities at night, always portioning out, at most, 1 serving of fruit. I say 1 serving because it's not necessarily 1 whole fruit, right? So, for example, strawberries, usually it's 7. For bananas, depending on your needs, from half to 1. And for apples, it's usually 1. In this case, it will always depend. If you have any questions, talk to your nutritionist or your doctor in your city to get individual guidance. Another point is to never consume fruit juice at this point. People sometimes think about fruit and say, so I'll have some orange juice. It can have a very large amount of carbs. Depending on how many oranges you squeeze into the glass, it can have 40 grams. That's not what you want at this moment. So always choosing whole fruit instead of juice is definitely better for your health. Be mindful of the glycemic load, right? And at that moment, incorporate sources of healthy fats, fiber, and even protein, and avoid more sugar, more glucose. So for example, if you're going to eat a banana, you shouldn't add honey to it, and you shouldn't add more oats at night. Ideally, you should try to balance things out in this way. And also be careful with dried fruit. Many people don't know this, but they have a big impact on blood sugar. They're densely caloric and concentrated. So they're not good options for you to eat before going to bed. There are people who say, I'm craving something sweet, so I'll eat a whole jar of dates. There's a lot of carbohydrates, really a lot in there. So be careful with that. By making good choices, fruit will definitely bring benefits to your health. Tell me, which fruit do you eat the most during this period at night? Do you eat it as a late night snack, as a dessert, or do you not eat fruit at all? I'd love to see your comment. Remember to like the video, it really helps me out, and share it with anyone you think might enjoy it. Let's work together to spread this chain of kindness. That's what I want here on the channel. See you next time. Bye.